So, Sandor, welcome and thank you again for your early morning arrival. And we're very, very pleased to see you.
Well, I'm so happy to be here with you this morning, and it's always fun having a reason to wake up. As I'm talking, I expect I'll see the dawn outside my windows. So okay, I like to just start with the most fundamental question, what is fermentation anyway? I mean, it turns out, virtually every human being on planet Earth consumes products of fermentation every single day. Um, and yet, a lot of people have no idea about this phenomenon or really what it is. Um, broadly speaking, fermentation is the transformative action of microorganisms. Um, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. If you come from a biology background, biologists would define fermentation a little bit differently as anaerobic metabolism, the production of energy without oxygen. I mean, in this sense, the cells of our bodies are capable of fermentation. Now, most of the foods and beverages that we regard as fermented meet the biologist definition, but there are a large handful that require oxygen. So, for instance, vinegar. The reason why alcoholic beverages are always sealed so firmly is because we need to protect them from oxygen. Because once they have access to oxygen, there are these bacteria called acetobacter that will metabolize the alcohol into acetic acid, which is vinegar. Um, you know, the other the other issue is that not every transformative action of microorganisms results in something delicious that we're ready to put into our mouths. And in fact, most of what would regard as food spoilage involves microorganisms. And, we don't, take the bag of decomposed parsley that we find that was hidden in a drawer in our refrigerator and hold it up and say, oh, look, the parsley fermented. We use a different vocabulary for this. The parsley spoiled, the parsley decomposed, the parsley rotted. And generally, we reserve the word fermentation to describe desirable or intentional microbial fermentations. But of course, there is not a full consensus on what is desirable. And so, there are certain fermented foods that can be very polarizing. Certain very strong cheeses, for instance, that, some people might consider the most delicious thing in the world, and some other people might be, quite literally disgusted by. There's a large subjective component. Some of it is cultural, and some of it is just individual. But anyway, fermentation is the transformative action of microorganisms. People have been fermenting, according to the archaeological record, at least 10,000 years. I would say actually probably much longer, because that mostly tells us about the history of pottery, because presumably earlier vessels, especially for fermenting alcohol, would have been made out of hollowed out wood, animal membranes, other things that are fully biodegradable. Um, uh, fermentation is really ancient, but we did not really have a clear understanding of what drove the process until not even 200 years ago. About 175 years ago, Louis Pasteur, a French chemist, really definitively defined fermentation as the transformative action of microorganisms. And what we now understand, thanks to the field of microbiology that his research really spawned, is that everything we eat is populated by microorganisms. All the plants, all the animal products that make up our food. So there's a certain inevitability to microbial transformation of our food. And, people in every part of the world, without specifically knowing that, learned techniques to work with that underlying fact so that rather than food decomposing into a disgusting, ugly mess, they would somehow harness this invisible life force that's present on all of our food in order to produce alcohol, in order to make food more stable for preservation, in order to make food more digestible, in order to make food less toxic, in order to make food more delicious. Um, fermentation is broadly practiced. I mean, everywhere in the world, there are ancient traditions of fermentation. And, if we think about a standard Western diet, whether it's, in the UK or here in the US or anywhere in Europe or many other places, bread, product of fermentation. Cheese, product of fermentation. Cured meats involve fermentation. All of the condiments that we put on our food, the ancient condiments of the world, like fish sauce, like soy sauce, these directly involve fermentation. And, most of the rest of our, contemporary condiments, whether it is mustard, whether it is ketchup, whether it is chutneys, whether it is salsas, whether it is Worcestershire sauce, but they all involve vinegar, which is an important product of fermentation. Chocolate is fermented, coffee is fermented, certain varieties of tea are fermented, many olives are fermented. Of course, pickles are fermented, sauerkraut, kimchi. So there's a really, vast array of fermented foods and beverages that exist in the world, and they touch the lives, the mouths, the stomachs of almost every individual everywhere. Um, you know, uh, Fermentation goes beyond food. Compost, the process that, underlies the, sort of maintenance and rebuilding of fertility in the soil is a fermentation process. It's, microorganisms breaking down, dead plant matter, our food waste, excrement, everything back into humus that regenerates the soil. Biofuels, involve fermentation. Silage, one of the ways that people in temperate regions feed their livestock during the winter involves fermentation. So fermentation has a lot of fiber arts. This word retting, if you're getting the fibers out of a fibrous stocky plant to create fabric, that involves fermentation. There's many applications of fermentation beyond food. There's been some, pronounced revival of interest in fermentation over the last a decade or two. I mean, really, our grandparents and their grandparents were eating and drinking just as much, if not more, fermented foods and beverages than people in our time are. But suddenly, there's a lot of, interest and attention to this process, and I would say that that stems more than anything from the Human Microbiome Project and our growing awareness that bacteria are, an important part of our functionality. It looks like all of us, grew up, somewhere, mid-century U.S. and there's a mid-century 20th century, and we never heard a good word about bacteria. Bacteria were really, to the degree that they were recognized at all, they were recognized as something dangerous, our enemies to be destroyed with chemicals. But in the last couple of decades, there's really a growing recognition that we can't really think of bacteria as our enemies. Bacteria are our ancestors, and bacteria have been with us all along, and bacteria are an important part of our ability to function, our physiology, and the same is true for every kind of animal and every kind of plant. Um, So, so I think a lot of people have gotten interested in fermentation for, what we call probiotics, the idea of ingesting bacteria that can potentially increase biodiversity in our bodies and potentially improve digestion, improve immune function. There's even some research suggesting that it can improve mental health. So I think that's the number one reason. I know that, since COVID times, there's been, and really, I think in the UK, since earlier than that, there's been a great revival of interest in sourdough bread. And basically, if you compare a loaf of bread that was made with pure culture yeast versus a well-fermented sourdough loaf, you have a lot more nutrients in the sourdough loaf because the fermentation breaks down chemical bonds and makes minerals that are in the grains more accessible to the people who eat the bread. It breaks down gluten. So a lot of people who can't eat your standard commercial supermarket bread can eat it. You get more nutrients out of it. It tastes better and it has the potential to last longer. Um, my interest in fermentation, I've been, kind of obsessed with fermentation for I'd say 32 years now. My first interest was, as a kid where I wasn't thinking about fermentation, but I loved pickles, and my grandparents were all immigrants from Eastern Europe, and the kinds of pickles that we had in our home were fermented cucumbers, what sometimes people call kosher dills. They're sort of the Polish style of gherkins that you probably can find sometimes in the UK. And I love this flavor of lactic acid. I wasn't thinking about how they were made, but I was very drawn from a very young age to this, this flavor of fermentation. Um, when I was in my mid 20s, I spent a couple of years experimenting with a diet called macrobiotics. That's a sort of Japanese inspired diet. And macrobiotics really places a lot of emphasis on the digestive benefit of pickles and other live ferments. And I started noticing during that time that these pickles that I'd been eating my entire life, whenever I would bite into them, frankly, now when I just think about them or talk about them, I can feel my salivary glands under my tongue squirting out saliva. And I really began to associate these foods in a very tangible way with getting my digestive juices flowing. And I started really seeking out live fermented foods, but I still wasn't making them because I was living in New York where I grew up and they were really quite readily available. But then I moved to Tennessee. I moved to rural Tennessee and started keeping a garden. And I had been such a naive city kid, I'd never even thought about the idea that in a garden, all of the cabbage would be ready at about the same time. All of the radishes would be ready at about the same time. So the first year that I was gardening and had a nice abundance of cabbage, it occurred to me, oh, I love sauerkraut. I think that has something to do with preserving cabbage. I should figure out how to make sauerkraut. And, I just looked in, the most common cookbook you would find in American kitchens called The Joy of Cooking. And I found a recipe for how to make sauerkraut. And it was deceptively simple. I started making sauerkraut. I started playing around, experimenting with incorporating different kinds of vegetables in it, different seasonings. Then I learned how to make yogurt. That summer we had abundant blackberries, and I'd heard of blackberry wine, and I decided to investigate how to make blackberry wine, and that just began me on a journey of trying to learn about different kinds of fermentations. And then I wrote some books. My first book, Wild Fermentation, was published in 2003. My biggest, most recognized book, The Art of Fermentation, was published in 2012. This is my most recent book that was published in 2021. And I've taught all around the world. I'm actually going to be teaching this spring in the UK. I have two multi-day workshops there, one in Shropshire, one in Cambridge, and then also some events in London. But I mean, I've probably taught in like 25 countries. I mean, there's huge interest in this everywhere. And I think that because most of us were raised to imagine that bacteria are so dangerous, a lot of people project their anxiety about bacteria onto the process. So when people get interested in this, a lot of people have a certain amount of anxiety about it. So really, most of the work I do is demystifying fermentation. The fact is, fermentation makes food safer. I have various jars of fermented vegetables right here. I mean, in the United States, there has never been one single case of food poisoning or illness from fermented vegetables. It's about as safe as food gets because acid, the acidic environment that's created by the fermentation makes it impossible for any of the organisms that we associate with food poisoning and illness to grow. So even if the vegetables had been contaminated in some way with cells of Salmonella, E. coli, something like that, once you ferment it, they are destroyed by the acidity. So I mean, fermentation in every case is a strategy for safety. When you're dealing with animal products, when you're dealing with milk, and when you're dealing with meat, there's a little bit more potential for danger. You never have like a zero risk situation, but still, the process of fermentation, and particular the acidifying fermentations, just make food safer. So, a lot of what I do is demystifying it, and that's really mostly what people need. But there's a huge hunger for information about this from people who are interested in trying it out. I would say it goes, really hand in hand with any kind of efforts to um, reinvigorate local food production to sort of be encouraging efforts for a region to grow more food for itself, because it's just such an effective strategy for preservation. And while we're not today mostly thinking about something like cheese as a strategy for preservation, I mean, that's what cheese is preserved milk. You take something that is, among the most perishable of food products, and then you make a hard cheese with it. And it can sit, even in a, ambient room temperature for years. It really extends the life of food. And, it's just part of how people everywhere make practical use of the food resources that are available to them. So I think, any kind of efforts to encourage local food production need to, encourage, various preservation methods, including fermentation. And then the one other thing I'll mention, because Graham told me that many of you are involved in local councils, is the regulatory environment. I mean, a lot of the, small producers, just are suffocated by, regulations that have been designed for large scale food production. And, if we want to encourage local and regional food production, including fermentation, we just have to make it possible for people to, sort of begin production enterprises. And part of that is, being reasonable in the regulatory requirements. Um, uh, I guess I will stop with that, and hopefully some of you have curiosities and things you'd like to ask me to address.
Sandor, sorry, Sandor, that was fascinating. I must say, we spend a lot of time on these forums talking about biodiversification and biodiversification net gain and biodiversity net gain. And it's the first time I've ever had suggested to me that biodiversity is going on inside my body. So that was very refreshing. Thank you very
Well,
much.
and let me just say one further thing about that, which is that, I mean, I don't think historically, I mean, nobody really ever had to think about that. Um, um, And the same is just as true of, a cow or a rabbit. And obviously, they're not thinking about that. But sort of two factors more than anything else, have caused a diminishment of biodiversity in our bodies. And number one is chemical exposure, the most obvious being antibiotic drugs, but really, really many others. Agrochemicals, different kinds of chemical exposures have caused a diminished biodiversity in our gut, as compared to our ancestors. And then the second is fiber in our diets, like with the amount of prepared foods that people are eating, juices with the pulp removed, much less root vegetables. We just have less fiber than most people in the past have had. And so, fiber constitutes the food for bacteria, along the entire length of our digestive system. Like the new jargony way to say this is prebiotics. Sort of foods that feed the bacteria in our bodies. And so, we just have, more reason that we need to diversify the bacteria in our gut, and also eat more fiber.
Well, I have a host of other questions, but I see there are some other people lining up, so let's go through them first. Stuart, would you like to press on, please?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for a very interesting and entertaining talk. And I would like to concur with you. I'm fortunate enough to have a Polish cleaner who regularly makes this for me. Your fermented cucumbers. Yes.
No.
But my question really is I've become increasingly interested in soils and obviously growing food. I do a lot of growing veg at home. Um, and I'm becoming increasingly aware of the role of mycorrhizal fungi, but also now that there seems to be as complex as the human microbiome our plants' microbiome. So not only the fungi there, the bacteria, the viruses, and I gather studies have shown that food grown in really good soil with lots of mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria, apart from being better for you, they've actually done taste tests. And I think it was on corn, they made bread out of it. And testers could actually tell whether this corn had been grown in a soil rich in mycorrhizal fungi or soil without the mycorrhizal fungi.
Mhm.
So I'm just a bit concerned about the rise in urban hydroponic farms. Does the hydroponics confer the same benefits as growing it in good natural soil?
Um, I would say probably not. But I mean, I'm not an expert in that. What I can tell you is that there's a broad consensus among, botanists and microbiologists, that, every plant growing out of soil on planet Earth is host to lactic acid bacteria. And the same is not necessarily true of hydroponics, unless it has specifically been introduced. Um, so, I mean, that's my small window onto this larger question. But I would say that, no, I mean, hydroponics, fundamentally lacks the biodiversity of the soil. Now, I mean, to me, that would not be like a reason to um, uh, be against hydroponic agriculture. It's just saying like hydroponic agriculture alone really cannot fully sustain us. Yeah, it can certainly supplement, and maybe enable us to be able to grow food in places where we would not otherwise be able to. But I mean, I think it has to just be viewed as, a little bit of extra, like that needs to be on top of a base of food grown in, the more traditional, out of the soil way.
Okay, thank you.
Amanda, please.
Hello. Um, my profuse apologies and regret that my laptop wouldn't let me in. So I arrived just as you said, so I'll leave it there. So I am so grateful that these sessions are recorded because I was so looking forward to today's session. Um, I'm a complete convert, if convert is the right word, away from highly processed food. I can only guess what you've been speaking about, but I've been involved with Zoe and Tim Spector's group looking at
Hmm.
gut health from a scientific, academic, and NHS, foot in both camps. And my professional background is as a health economist, so trained to understand what is good research and what isn't, and what could be cost effective for our NHS, for our country, but also what is good for us as individuals. Um, and I've had cancer twice. So not only have I had all manner of chemical exposure, but internally my gut and my own microbe, if you like, biodiversity, has been completely shot. Never mind antibiotics. I mean, this is about the worst thing you can do to a body. Um, and I'm still here. So I'm trying to resolve all of my what my body is, the state it's now in, and recover it. And so I have a good friend in Jennifer, who's a friend to this program, this group, who's a water specialist, but she's helped me with fermentation, whether it's seeds or it's all the different bits and pieces that one can start. Let's call them starters, for want of a better word. And I was also blessed with a new neighbor a couple of months ago who's a Chinese specialist on mushrooms and how mushroom production and how to keep it in its natural state and yet spread it as widely as possible for the benefits of human health, and whilst being kind to the planet. So those were my reasons for wanting to come and to, curiosity. And also, I don't mind sharing with anybody who's going to listen to the playback on this that I am a druid in my outlook. So a great believer that the earth, we don't need to try and recreate how clever the earth is. It does what naturally it does best because it's like survival of the fittest and whatever you want to believe as far as the earth looking out for us and itself. And if it does it, why do we try to recreate it? Just let
Hmm.
it do it. So any reflections that you might have to turn this into a question on how somebody recovering from two lifetime doses worth of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, all the other things that can go wrong with the gut. I definitely feel that my gut is very different to what it was before treatment. And it's been 5 years now that I've been trying to get it back to what it was. It's not a
Well,
it's not a medical question I'm asking
yeah,
you. It's purely from a
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No,
thank
no,
you.
I understand. Um, so I mean, what I can tell you is I have done, a handful of workshops over the years, with cancer survivor groups, groups of people in exactly the same situation that you are, who, have survived, but, with new problems, caused by the treatments that they received. And, I think a lot of people find that incorporating live fermented foods into, the diet can, improve gut function in different ways. And then the other related issue is the ways in which, eating bacteria-rich foods by increasing biodiversity in the gut can also help overall immune function. And a lot of people have come out of that with some kind of suppressed immunity. So, I'm definitely not a medical professional, but I like to share information about how to make these foods with people. And I know that, some people in your situation have found these foods helpful. Let me also just say that, like, I have, encountered, more than a few people who are promoting various fermented foods on the basis of health claims that I would consider to be unsubstantiated. So, for instance, there are known to be these compounds called isothiocyanates that develop in fermented vegetables, which may in some regard be considered anti-carcinogenic, preventing the kinds of mutations that can lead to cancers. And then some people have extrapolated from that like eating sauerkraut is a treatment for cancer. I mean, I would never ever recommend to anyone that, if they're facing a cancer diagnosis, all they need to do is eat a lot of sauerkraut. Although I have met people who are convinced that they cured their cancer by eating fermented vegetables. So, I mean, I think we have to regard these things as, supplemental that have the potential to improve digestion, improve immune function. They're generally not like the answer to a huge health challenge. Um, and then more broadly, I mean, I think, the move away from processed foods. I mean, not only for people, facing huge health challenges, but maybe even more so for people who haven't yet. But just moving towards, more a more wholesome, whole foods diet rather than these, sort of foods, made in a laboratory that, have, fragmented parts of so many different things with so many, synthesized chemicals added to them. So yeah, I mean, I'm a real proponent of, simpler, simpler diet. And I think that, they just serve our well-being better. And even further than that, I mean, I would say I'm a proponent of trying to, move away from centralized food production and global food distribution and really reinvigorating local and regional food production. And I think that they really, go together. And I don't say that as someone who's like dogmatically opposed to, I mean, I love to eat oranges and I love to eat bananas. I mean, I don't think it's wrong to eat things that come from far away, but I think what creates huge vulnerabilities is, when we have a society that is so completely dependent on food resources that, come from such faraway places, and it just makes everybody more vulnerable to, any kind of disruptions, whether it's, pandemic like COVID, or whether it's war, tariffs, political violence. I think that everybody is in a more secure, less vulnerable position when more of our food is being produced locally and regionally.
Fantastic. I've got a bunch of questions for you, Sandor. So let me move on to David so that he isn't waiting forever. So all yours, David.
Yes, I wanted to ask about fermenting industrial chemicals, not food. I actually I was doing a PhD in use of sugarcane byproducts, and I visited a place in Egypt where they made acetone and butanol by fermenting molasses using the process they do in Russia for based on potatoes. It's actually it used to be before the rise of the petrochemical industry, mostly after the Second World War, pretty well everything came from nature. In fact, Egon Glessinger, who spent his time preventing the Nazis taking over all the woods in Europe, after the war wrote a book called The Coming Age of Wood, of how everything we wanted, be it food, chemicals, whatever, could be synthesized from wood and natural products, some of them by fermentation, other by other things like so I was wondering what else we can get by fermentation apart from foods.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't really speak to the full extent of that. I can tell you that like a huge number of pharmaceutical products are made by fermentation, generally by bacteria that have been genetically engineered to create specific chemical byproducts. Um, and I would assume, all kinds of chemicals can be produced in ways like that, but I don't know much about that. I mean, I have no formal background in this. I'm certainly not a microbiologist or a food scientist. I got interested in this from my garden. I've been obsessed, but mostly with the food aspects of it. And I don't know that much about, the full range of industrial applications of fermentation, except to know that they are, they are many and varied. And then I would say, the one other thing I would add is like, the effort, when there have been oil spills, in the end, it's applying bacteria to break down the oil that is what is able to break it down. And I think that a lot of the, environmental catastrophes that we've had, bacteria, you know, like offer the best solutions that we've come up with.
And sewage plants.
Sewage plants. Yeah, yeah, sure.
So I have a couple of questions for you that I hope are pertinent to counsellors generally, Sandor, because I felt that the first 30 minutes of your chat were a wonderful education that we could use at council level to, exactly as you say, demystify and perhaps take away some of the dire feelings that people have about bacteria. And I loved your idea of uh, converting milk to cheese, was taking one of the most perishable foodstuffs that we've got and changing it to something that's really long lasting as well as being safe and nutritious. So I think we all have a sort of a duty or a desire to educate locally to help the local food presentation or production that you're advocating, because I think over here are on the same ballpark of thinking. So I just wanted to check that would you be okay with us using your video of you as a local guide? Because I think it was fabulous at helping people understand actually what you're offering or the process of fermentation is offering.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I'm happy for you to, use the recording of my presentation today. And if you look at my website, which is wildfermentation.com,
Yeah,
if you
been
go to
there.
the page called Media Links, I mean, I just list, sort of hundreds. So many of them are just articles, but many of them are videos of earlier presentations that I've done.
Perfect, because I do think that you've done us a great favor by going into what can be done. And I think that the more we generate more food locally as part of our resilience and sustainability programs, the more fermentation is going to play a major part. And I do think you did a lovely job of educating us. So thank you for that. Let me pass you over to Amanda, please.
Yes, only if everybody else has had go number one first. Then I'll be greedy and have my second attempt. Uh, I would like to draw everybody's attention, if you're not already, and if she's not on the call, to one of our councillors in Stroud, who is working, I'm fairly sure it's Stroud now I've said that, not Forest of Dean, but it's here in Gloucestershire anyway, who was rather taken by the idea of all the doggy do. So we have that much poop that gets collected and what happens to it, and could something more useful be done with it? And all the whole idea about how do we break down undesirable into something that could be really positive and useful. And I'm very aware that my gut appears to be much better since I've started fostering guide dogs and having animals in the house.
Mm.
Now, I'm not suggesting anything untoward here. I'm simply saying that she's managed to find quite a good way using wormeries to convert something that is regarded as waste and a problem into something that's useful and healthy and reduces the problem. So I'm just wondering whether fermentation, accepting that I've missed your presentation, but is there something that fermentation might help us with the undesirables, converting them into something useful? Now,
Well, I mean, basically, the reason why, the earth isn't just a pile of excrement of, dogs, every other animal, humans, is because it breaks down so readily. And so, um, I mean, as Graham just mentioned, sewage treatment, that's all based on bacteria. But I think, any kind of animal excrement. I mean, nobody really talks about dog poop as, as full of fertility as, say, cow poop. But it will break down, and composting, the microbial breakdown of organic matter, is basically based on mixing different kinds of things together. So if you just made a giant mountain of dog poop, it would be very, very slow to break down. But if you mix that with, various, dead leaves and, fallen leaves and dead plants, it would break down quite readily and just sort of, disappear and potentially be a source of soil fertility. But I think that, I mean, historically, there hasn't really been the concept of waste that we have now. Like, everything just recycles back into the earth, and it's really, quite elegant. Um,
I
and
guess
are you?
what I was thinking of from the perspective of this particular councillor's inspiration to our council was one of, instead of seeing waste as something you've got to manage away and out of your environment
Mm.
and then becomes a problem, can we do more at parish and town council level to have a circular economy in waste? In other words, produce something useful at a parish council level that our community can then benefit from. So not just composting, but whether it needs to be wormery, whether there needs to be tests done to check that all the nasties that are in dog poop are not there when you've finished your processing. That whole thing of how do we make it easy for people to have that circular waste management in such a way that we all can learn from it easily, and it's kind of like in a kit, a do-it-yourself, take away all the, maybe you still need the red dog poo bins, but it's the parish that collects instead of district having to send out vehicles that have to travel a long way, and then the incinerators and all the other stuff that is just unnecessary if you put your worms to it.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is that it's a lot more practical at some sort of collective level than at the individual level. And with composting, the reason is that once you reach a certain critical mass, you generate a lot of heat. If you
Mm.
have a tiny little compost pile at home, not necessarily, but the larger the mass of it, the more heat you will generate. And heat is the key to making it safe. Because that's once it generates heat, it will generally kill any of the pathogenic bacteria that might be present in it. So I mean, I mean, the collective level could really be, sort of quite limited and small, but it's the accumulation that, sort of enables the process to be so effective.
May
Okay,
I ask one other quick question, Graham, which is simply, if I may, does that mean that, in your opinion, the size at a parish and town council level would be too small to generate that heat? Or is it a question that actually just leave it as it is, because when all that poop gets collected from a whole district, that's the sort of scale that we need?
Parishes, you should say, Amanda, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
something between 2 and 5,000 residents, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
with a certain number of dogs.
yeah. I mean, I think the key is it can't just be the dog excrement. It needs to be mixed with other things in order to, sort of generate that heat and effectively break down.
Perfect. So keep going with the composting and include uh, animal pet excrement within that.
Yeah.
Have it of scale. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's really helpful.
coming
You're
back to
welcome.
an earlier question, Sandor, you were suggesting how fermentation can help your microbiome recover after cancer treatment. What sort of time scale are we looking to affect these changes after you've wiped out virtually everything with radiation and chemicals?
Well, okay. I mean, I am not a practitioner. I can't give people, I can't really give anyone a timeline. What I can offer is anecdotal reports, and I can say, like, in, my career as a fermentation educator, I have heard many hundreds of people tell me that when they began introducing live fermented foods into their diet, whatever kind of chronic digestive problems that they were having started improving.
Right.
I have heard people who say, I've never eaten foods like this. When I first ate them, I had a lot of gas, I had some kind of digestive disruption, but then more often I've heard the story, but I kept on eating a little bit and everything started to get better. I would say it's not about a singular food. I'm not saying like, oh, you have to eat sauerkraut. It's about diversity,
Mhm.
eating a variety of different kinds of live fermented foods, eating some yogurt, eating some sauerkraut, eating some kimchi. It's about the variety. It's not about eating a lot. People sometimes imagine, that I'm talking about, eating a big plate full of sauerkraut. It's about trying to eat a little bit frequently,
Yep.
and with some variety. And I can't give you a timeline. I mean, part of the problem is, everybody's body is different. The problems that people, and I wouldn't recommend this specifically just for people who are recovering from chemotherapy. I mean, I think that, almost everybody can benefit from improved digestion. We live in a society where vast numbers of people experience constipation. Some people experience more serious disruptions, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease. And I'm not saying that fermented vegetables are just the cure-all for all of these things, but so consistently through the years, I've heard feedback from people that their digestion seemed to improve as a result of incorporating these kinds of foods. But I can't say 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. Everybody's different, and the condition that people are beginning with is always different. There's nobody who's had chemotherapy, nobody who's taken antibiotic drugs for years, nobody starting with zero bacteria in their gut, because it would just be utterly impossible for us to survive with
Yeah.
zero bacteria in our gut. But, all of these kinds of processes, have the result of diminishing biodiversity.
Yeah.
Strategies for improving biodiversity are a great way to go. And this is not the only one. I mean, there's certainly more radical ways people do this. There are um, basically like, suppositories, microbiome suppositories that people sometimes take to, try to dramatically improve gut biodiversity. But this is an extremely accessible one, where you don't need, to go to a doctor because these are just incredibly safe foods that are more and more widely available. I mean, the first time I taught in the UK, which was probably 2007 or 8, I mean, I couldn't find live fermented vegetables anywhere. But now, my more recent visits, I mean, they're really, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're everywhere, but they're really like quite available if you seek them out. And then, beyond that, making a jar of fermented vegetables is, I can tell you in 30 seconds how you do it. Like you chop vegetables, you create surface area. There's no single way to do it. You can do it finely, you can do it coarsely, whatever you like. You salt them. There's no magic number. A lot of people throw out around 2% salt. That's perfectly fine. But, personally, I prefer lower salt. I probably do like 1.25% salt, but I don't measure it. I just lightly salt it, mix it all up, taste it. It's just like anything else. Like you just salt it to taste, and we don't all have the same taste for salt. Then you can add other kinds of seasonings as you wish. I love caraway seeds. Sometimes I make kimchi, and I put chilies and ginger in there. I've had some beautiful curry krauts. Some people like dill. You can keep it really plain. The only limitation is our imagination. And then you mix up the salt and the seasonings with the vegetables. I like to spend like a few minutes just squeezing the vegetables with my hands. And what this does is break, the salt starts drawing water out of the vegetables, and then um, squeezing them basically breaks down cell walls and helps them release more juice more quickly. And the key is simply getting the vegetables submerged. And so then you just take a jar, any kind of a jar. A wide mouth jar is easier to deal with than a narrow neck jar, but whatever, you can work with any kind of jar. And then you just force the vegetables in there until they're submerged under their own juices. And then you just wait. And then there's no fixed length of time. One variable would be temperature. If you make it like in a summer heat wave, everything's going to go much faster. If your kitchen is cool, or if you have a cellar that stays the temperature of the earth, the process goes very, very slowly, and you can really potentially preserve the vegetables for many months. I mean, this was made in October. This has never been in the refrigerator. I have a cellar under my house with a big oh yeah, okay, you've got one there. So but you don't have to wait for months. Like, I mean, I generally recommend people wait like 4 or 5 days and then taste it. And then press the vegetables back down under the juice, and then give it another 4 or 5 days. Taste it again. The acidity builds over time. So it turns out that many people who have not been eating these foods their entire lives prefer a milder version that's not as acidic. That's easier, that's faster. That might take a week or something. If you let it go longer, it develops a more pronounced acidity. Really, if we're thinking about biodiversity, because it turns out it's a successional process where you get different bacterial strains coming into dominance at different stages in the process. If you eat it at different stages of its development, it develops greater biodiversity.
Yep.
But it's really straightforward process, especially with vegetables.
Well, I'm delighted you gave us that. Thank you very much, Sandor. There is quite fascinating television program going on in the UK at the moment called What Not to Eat. And that's alarmingly horrifying and alarmingly, or rather supportively reassuring at the same time, where they're basically stating that more than 50% of the UK's national diet is ultra processed foods, and they want us to change that. But it's intriguing to me that none of the solutions that they've put forward, which do seem to make a big difference to the control victims that they're trying it out on has suggested fermented foods. They're obviously behind the times. But anyway, let's go on to Stuart, please.
Well, I was just very quickly going to say, or tell Amanda that human waste has been collected for many, many years. I think the British military were doing it to extract urea, nitrogen to make explosives with. The Japanese have been doing it for a long, long time. Going around, there's somebody actually paid to go around and collect night soil, which they then compost and spread on the farmland. And I do think we've taken a retrograde move by abandoning these things. I think there's a huge amount of natural resources we're just wasting in water treatment plants and then pumping it into the ocean. We ought to be conserving it and using it on our own land.
The Koreans famously do that. They spread the human feces as fertilizer.
They might well do. I don't know.
Graham, we do it here in Borton.
There you go. There you go.
There's a big tank in the field up by the just off the Fossway. There's a lay-by, and the tankers are repeatedly in there with their hoses, putting it into this big container in the field, and then the farms from around here just help themselves to it. But as I put in the chat, it's the PFAS and the microplastics and the human waste that's the problem. If we put that out on the soil, we've got problems.
And all the drugs and stuff like that in them. Yes.
David, please, your turn.
Yes, just if you're thinking of things at parish council level, speak to some of the farmers. They may already have a biogas digester, which can take the excrement and water weeds. I actually did a research project on how much energy we could get from aquatic plants. Seaweed if you live near the coast, and ideally first in a biogas digester so you get some methane, and then into a compost heap. And by that time, you'll actually have reduced the risks of spreading it a fair bit.
Splendid, thank you.
Yeah. And I was going to ask Sandor, what's your favourite kind of beer? Completely wild yeast?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love, I mean, I love, I mean, I love those like, wild ales and sour beers like the Belgian style ones. I love saisons, but I love all beer. I mean, I have yet to meet a beer or ale that I didn't like. I have very a wide-ranging taste in beer.
Including alcohol-free.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I think I mean, the techniques for that have gotten a lot better. I would say in the 20 years that I've been doing this, the dairy-free cheeses have gotten much, much better. But I do enjoy alcohol. I do enjoy dairy. I mean, I can admire how much the techniques have improved, and still, my favorites are the classics.
Well said. Yeah,
And
I think
kombucha?
some of the early no alcohol beers, I think they boiled it to get the alcohol out. Anyway, carry on.
And then, okay, so Amanda just asked about kombucha. So sure, I mean, kombucha. I mean, I can see that, in the UK as in the US, it's kind of exploded in popularity, and it's another potential source of live bacterial cultures. For myself, I'm trying to not drink, too much sugary stuff, and kombucha still has sugar. It has some other good stuff that develops as a result of the fermentation, but I'm personally not interested in like everyday consumption of sugary beverages. But I think certainly for people coming off of like a soda pop habit, kombucha, is a great sort of transition off of that. And
Are you talking about tinned kombucha like you buy from the shop or homemade?
either way, I
Because I
mean,
don't put so much sugar in. I just do it from black tea.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the sugar is what ferments.
Yeah, yeah.
So you need to add some sugar in, and then most people, if you ferment it till all the sugar's gone, it's like vinegar. And kombucha vinegar is wonderful, but most people don't want to drink it like that. Most people like it when it's got some residual sugar so that it tastes sweet.
Okay. Yeah.
But and there's I mean, in the UK, I know there's also people making and selling water kefir. Um, there are there's a wonderful Russian lightly fermented beverage called kvass, which I really love. But there's really the lightly fermented soft drinks is an area where there's sort of expansive infinite possibilities. I make this Mexican pineapple beverage sometimes called tepache, where you basically ferment the pineapple skins in a sugar water solution. I love this Caribbean beverage called Mabi that's made from the bark of a tree that grows on many of the islands of the Caribbean. But this idea of these lightly fermented soft drinks in the vein of kombucha is a whole other realm of fermentation. But maybe I can wrap this up by saying there is nothing that any of us has ever eaten that cannot be fermented. Like everything can be fermented. I have right here. This is a batter made from lentils and rice. This is the batter that will make the Indian crepes called dosa. Um, um, but I mean anything, like any kind of meat, any kind of grain, any kind of pulse, any kind of vegetable, any kind of fruit, like anything we can possibly eat can be fermented, and not just in one single way, in a variety of ways. Yeah.
Graham, can I ask a wrap-up question? Yeah, thank you. Okay, quick one. Can you have too much fermented food?
Sure. Sure. I mean, everything in moderation. I mean, just think if you just you could eat bread all day and you wouldn't feel very good. You could drink beer all day and you wouldn't feel too good. You could eat cheese all day and you wouldn't feel too good. So, I mean, everything in moderation. There was a guy who wrote a book that I actually didn't read because I thought it was a terrible idea, but the book was called Fermented Man, and it was this guy documenting his year of eating only fermented foods. I just wouldn't recommend that. Like, I just think it's a terrible. Fermentation has its place, and it has a huge place. But who would want to forego the pleasures of fresh fruit in the summer and the autumn, based on some idea that it's best to ferment everything. So I think that all things, including fermentation, in moderation.
Thank you.
Sandor, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I think you did a lot to certainly improve my ignorance and or reduce it, as is a better word. And it was a pleasure to have you on. And thank you so much for getting up early for us.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your interest and for your wonderful questions. And
Uh,
I wish
we
everybody a good day. And
we
also,
put
Graham, if there is a link where this will be on the internet, if you send it to me, I would post it on my website if that's
yeah.
appropriate.
You
Or
get that. Yep, you get that automatically, and we've got links to your website here, which will be available to people to look, and hopefully it'll produce vast numbers of book sales for you. So, so
Well,
thank you
and
all
and
very
and
much for
please, if
coming.
any of you are interested or know anyone who might be interested, I do have these workshops coming up in the UK in May and June.
Yes, could you, if you could send me those in an email, I'll put them on the website so that everyone can get hold of them, if you
Okay,
don't
great.
mind, because then that will spread the word for you.
Okay, great.
And next week, I just let people know because I'm organized to the point where we're going to get a discussion from Lucy Eccles, who is a community resilience officer in Gloucester. And I'm hoping that she'll help us all improve our resilience. And in the meantime, have a great week. Thank you for coming. The weather here is fantastic, as you'd expect from the Isle of Wight. And I leave you with a lot of sorrow that you aren't all living here. Bye bye. Thank you.
Graham, I
Thanks a
work
lot.
with Lucy. I thoroughly recommend next week's session.
Thank you very much, Amanda. That's great stuff. See you all. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.